What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And for about the last week, we've been going a lot over the Modern format. We just had the Modern Horizons 3 Pro Tour. We saw the impact of Modern Horizons 3 on that format and just kind of the implications going forward. I have a whole recap of the entire weekend, plus kind of like my final thoughts and kind of the metagame moving forward. So if that's something that interests you, go ahead and check out those videos. But today we're going to be shifting our focus back to the Pioneer format. We have a few weeks left of RCQ season to qualify for Regional Championship, Washington, D.C., October 4th through the 6th. Of 2024. So if you're not already qualified for that event, you have a few more weekends to do so, and hopefully you can accomplish that because your boy finally did it. But so in this video today, we're going to be taking a look at the Pioneer format in like a broad general sense here, while we're going to be looking at some decks in like macro archetypes that I think are the best to play, or at least some very good options to play. This is kind of personally how I feel about them in the context of the current metagame that we are seeing right now. So hopefully this is some kind of help to you. Maybe if you're stuck between like, man, I really want to play like a control deck, but I don't know which control deck I want to play. Maybe I want to play like a combo deck, but I don't know what combo deck to play, or the reasons for playing a certain combo deck. So hopefully this kind of gives a little bit more clarity going into the format a little bit more. Maybe if you are qualified for the regional championship, maybe this will give you kind of a nice base to kind of start testing and figuring out like what deck you want to play. And if you're still trying to qualify for the RC, then this will kind of give you something to look towards building and look towards playing, as we get to the closeout point of the RCQ season. So, of course, before we get too deep into any of that, and we look at all these different archetypes in the Pioneer format, if you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we do breakdowns and other videos of the Modern and Pioneer format, along with some other longer form videos as well. Hopefully we have a sweet one cooked up for this week. But, if any of that interests you, subscribe, ring notification bell, all that fun, happy stuff. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. We're on the fast track to 1K subscribers. That's been the ultimate goal all year. It was a big, tall ask, at the beginning of the year, and I think it might actually be doable. And, y'all are just amazing. The community that we're trying to build is awesome, and I can't wait. I'm having so much fun doing this, and I look forward to continuing this as we kind of close out, start the second half of the year. We're kind of flying by. But yeah, with all that said, let's go ahead. We'll start with like the more aggressive archetypes, and we'll kind of work our way down to some more controlling decks. And hopefully that will kind of, again, give you some clarity. We'll give you some reasons why you should play these decks, why they're good in the format currently, and why they are some pretty good choices going forward. One side note I want to throw in here before we actually really get into the video, because I just thought of it like in the transition and stuff. But if you are already playing, a deck that I think is like the second or third best in like the archetype or whatever, or there's like another deck that you've been playing, I fully implore you that whatever deck you've been playing, if you've been having success with it, to continue to play that deck. I think that, format recognition and just knowing what you're doing in certain matchups is a lot more important than just being able to switch to what's perceived as like the best deck in the format. I've done that for years playing Modern. I've done it for Pioneer as well. I've just picked up a deck that I think is a lot of fun to play, and I've just played it a ton and kind of know, the different situations to be able to kind of go for things and, put myself in the best position to win. So if you're playing something like an Is It Phoenix and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good, whatever, I think I'm going to switch archetypes, whatever. Like, don't give up on it, just because Phoenix also in that example is one of the best decks to be playing in the format. But, if you're thinking about switching off of it, playing something else or whatever, and you want to do that just to have fun, or, you genuinely want to learn something different, totally fine. But don't feel like you have to switch archetypes just because you're not like necessarily winning, or maybe doing as much winning, what have you, with that deck. Just play it a little bit more. You already have all this information garnered from actually playing games with a certain deck. So again, I definitely implore you to, if you want to switch, get a change of scenery, that's fine. But if you're like looking in your for a different deck to play, and you're just thinking that it'll do a complete 180 of everything, and you'll start winning more because you switched or whatever, because you're chasing like the best deck, I would say that for a very small subset of people that will actually work. And for a lot of people, like, it's just more worth it to have all the information and stuff that you've gotten and understanding how your deck works and everything with the deck that you're playing right now than trying to basically get yourself caught up to speed playing a different deck. So with that said, now let's actually get into the video and let's talk about some of these sweet decks that you could be playing in Pioneer and hopefully getting some success, maybe if you don't know what exactly to play in the format. So let's go ahead and check them out. So first, we'll kind of start with the aggro variants, and the aggro deck of choice that if I just had to pick the best one of kind of this general archetype would be the Slick Shot variants, namely Gruul, Mono Red, and Boros in that order. So Gruul aggro or Gruul Slick Shot, whatever you want to call it, I think is kind of the right mix of playing spells that can go to the face. You have a decent amount of burn. You obviously get to play one of the best 2-mana aggro creatures in the format in Slick Shot Show Off. You get to play things like Kamano, you get Monastery Swift Spear, you end up getting the other wizard or whatever that I can never, like Soulscar Mage. You get things like that. You get a lot of aggressive creatures, you have a very low curve, and then you get things like a Tarkus Command, which can help your board go wide. You get some prowess triggers, you get some like super prowess triggers from the Slick Shot Show Off. You can deal a little bit of burn damage as well with that spell. It is so good in the format. You get things like Seek the Beast, which allow you to get some card advantage as well as another creature that is going to get bigger as you kind of cast these other red spells, and even these multicolored like green spells, they still count because they do have that color of, you know, in its in the spell. So you'll end up getting to grow your creature as well, and eventually gets to the point where it's very hard to kill it with even something like a Lightning Axe from like Is It Phoenix as well, which can be quite a bit of a problem if they have to exert a lot of resources into that, especially if you're able to kind of like beat down with some of these other aggressive creatures in the format as well. I think with the trend of the format, I think playing more burn spells, you know, and playing some of these other, you know, like Monstrous Rage and things like that, which are really, really good pump spells when you have Slick Shot Show Off plus all these other prowess creatures, that I think it's kind of the right build currently. While I really do like the burn and prioritizing the burn, it's because I put Mono Red in between the Gruul version and the Boros version, just because I don't think the pump spells right now are very good. I think you have, you know, blowout potential. Like your opponent stumbles playing either of these decks, you're more than likely going to kill them before they're able to reestablish anything, unless they're like 3-mana Wrath Tribal. And even then, like, it might not even be good enough. So definitely Gruul aggro being one of the better versions, just because you have the best of both worlds where you have this card advantage plus some of the pump/burn spells to go with a lot of the, you know, the prowess creatures, and of course the Slick Shot. Mono Red, you are definitely more burn focused, and really if you just get like one good hit in with like a Slick Shot Show Off, one of your prowess creatures, or even a Kamano, you know, you're able to just like Wizard's Lightning and skewer the critics them completely out of the game. Where Boros, like, you're just kind of hoping that, you know, you draw kind of the right mix of creatures and spells, or, you know, if you draw too many creatures, you're hoping that you draw some key pump spells, and if you draw too many pump spells, you're hoping that you draw some other protection spells so you can kind of protect your 1 or 2 threats. I think that these are going to be, you know, the premier aggro decks for a while, just because just how big that they can go. The fact that Slick Shot Show Off has haste and flying, and whenever you cast a spell, it's going to get +2/+0. Absolutely blowout potential against your opponent, because like when you put a like Monstrous Rage onto a Slick Shot Show Off, and then you already have a counter on it from like the Kamano as well, you know, just the fact that it'll have 4 toughness on it is just deceptively very hard to deal with in the format, short of something like a Lightning Axe or just having another like flying creature. But it's going to get all of its damage in super early, so even if you're able to kind of like stop it from, you know, attacking, with thanks to things like Monstrous Rage, it's going to have trample, so they can get in one more big attack, trample over your thing, and then more than likely end up ending the game with a set attack. So overall, you know, I'm absolutely in love with the Slick Shot aggro decks. I don't think you can go wrong with any of them, but if I had to rank them, I think I'd be more on like Gruul and Mono Red than something like Boros, with kind of the runner-up in this like aggressive category being Boros Convoke. It's second mainly because it's worse against, you know, some of the other better decks in the format. You know, I don't really like it against like a Malia combo if your, you know, mid-range opponents kind of understand like what's going on, you know, or really if like your opponents like kind of know what's going on top of the fact that Boros Convoke a lot of the times just loses to itself. You know, it's definitely a good deck. A deck that puts 14 power into play on turn 2 and can just immediately take your opponent to the woodshed and just pile on tons of damage and go wide in that nature is pretty good, and definitely deserves being, you know, one of the better aggro decks in the format. I just think between like Slick Shot's consistency, its ability to go wide, and then it can also progressively get taller. Just, again, from the nature of the deck, you're playing a decent amount of spells. You also have a pretty good pump spell that does, you know, the best of both worlds of being a pump and a burn spell at the same time, where Convoke, you know, if you mulligan to like 6 or 5 cards, you know, you can put 14 power into play on turn 2, but it is a lot harder than something like the Gruul version of like Slick Shot or like Boros, even Mono Red, getting to deal still tons of damage and cast multiple spells on a turn, you know, when they mull to 5 or 6. So Boros Convoke, probably still the second best aggro deck, but I think I put like multiple variants of Slick Shot aggro above Boros Convoke, simply for the fact that, again, you know, the consistency and then just the amount of power it can push through in just one turn. Like in a blink of an eye, you're at 2 life and you're staring at 4 creatures on the board that aren't going to die very easily to, you know, a Wrath, and even then, like, you could just die to a top deck creature plus a spell. So, you know, it definitely, if you're going to pick up an aggro deck, if you're looking to switch to an aggro deck, I would suggest Slick Shot Show Off. Easily, probably one of the best aggro decks in the format. But if you already have like Boros Convoke from like standard or whatever, and you just need to pick up like a few more cards, then, you know, I could see Boros Convoke being a decent option. Just know that a lot of the time it feels like you're going to lose more to yourself than you are actually, you know, doing kind of the super busted thing and learning all these sequencing tricks. So that's the aggro decks of the format. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't really like any of the other aggro decks in the format, like humans or any of the other like typal variants that we see in the format, or I guess Kindred technically in Magic terms, I guess. But, you know, those are the decks that I would play. And let's go ahead and move on to the opposite end of the spectrum. We'll go ahead and look at some mid-range decks. Before I get roasted by anyone in the comments saying that you know, mid-range is not the opposite end of the spectrum from aggro Dakota, I like half committed to going to control because I have it on my notes as like the next thing. But you know, mid-range I think is kind of like the good stepping stone, because, you know, mid-range decks typically are these decks that can play one end of the spectrum. They can be more easier to shift towards playing a control role when it needs to, and then playing an aggro role when it needs to, depending on the matchups and everything. And maybe controversially, uncontroversially, whatever, I've been asked this question a lot of times, you know, and the top 2 decks that I have are the ones that I get asked about, you know, at least a few times I've been asked. So I think the best mid-range deck is Rakdos Vampires, with the second best one being Niv-Delight. I think it's pretty close. So Niv-Delight kind of gets the nod over any of the other like mid-range decks, simply for the fact that it beats Rakdos. In theory, Rakdos is a good matchup, at least I feel like, for Niv-Delight, just from the fact of the consistency of getting something like a, you know, if you're able to hit your land drops and everything, if everything goes right for both decks, and really for Niv, it's just hitting land drops, I think it has enough to kind of stave off vampires and kind of blunt their assault on a more aggressive draw, and then just be able to stabilize the board from there, because their mid-range spells just go so much bigger and so much harder than anything in Rakdos Vampires. Really, Niv-Delight has probably some of the best cards for a mid-range deck, just from, again, like the toolboxy nature of the deck by playing something like a Bring to Light. Like I said, in a head-to-head, I think Niv-Delight wins, but I think on a consistency basis, it's Rakdos Vampires like all the way. You know, there's just so many matchups where, you know, turn 1 Thoughtseize disrupt like the combo deck into Bloodtithe Harvester, into even like Vein Ripper from Sorin is just something super hard to come back from. And then, you know, if you have like a Mutavault played on like turn 3 as well, when you play the Sorin, then you're just going to be able to like activate plus the Sorin, get in for tons of damage, or even just like attack and then use the Sorin to like sacrifice the land, Lightning Helix your opponent, get a trigger from the Vein Ripper, and you just end up getting in tons of damage. I think from that it's like 11, and then you Helix your opponent 14, and then a creature dies 16, and then if another creature died before that, then, you know, they're dead. You know, if they shocked into land, they're dead. You know, so that's just kind of the aggressive draws that you could see from something like a Rakdos Vampires that could, in theory, beat a Niv-Delight deck, but short of, you know, that exact sequence of things kind of going on, It's very hard. Niv also, just every time I watch it being played, whether it's in paper or it's online, if I'm playing against it, whatever the case is, like Niv just always looks so good and just so dominant when it just hits its land drops and draws like halfway decent. So for me, like Rakdos Vampires, simply on consistency and probably being on the more aggressive end of the spectrum, which I think is a very good place to be if you are playing the format currently. I think it's better to kind of get to the board and kind of force your opponent to play in a certain way around you rather than you kind of sitting back and waiting for your opponent to kind of do their thing. So I really like the Rakdos Vampires deck in that aspect. But if you expect a lot of Rakdos Vampires and like your meta and things like that, and you still want to play kind of like a mid-range deck, then I think Niv absolutely is a very good option, as it just kind of beats up on some of the other bigger decks in the format and has a little bit of something for everybody. You know, you just kind of hope that you draw, you know, something like a Bring to Light. You can draw like Omnath or whatever and get some like advantage and stuff going that way. Both decks also getting to play Fable the Mirrorbreaker, the best 3 mana like red thing, you know, and even like for Rakdos too, like they're basically mono black, but they're playing red for like Bloodtithe Harvester, maybe some sideboard cards, and Fable the Mirrorbreaker, and that's just more than good enough. So definitely either deck, I don't think you can go wrong with playing. I think I give the nod to Rakdos Vampires again, just from essentially being a monocolored deck, splashing red. You know, it's very easy to just play a lot of lands that produce a black mana and just still get to do the thing from the Rakdos Vampire side, where Niv is on the other side of the spectrum, where you definitely want to have all 5 colors. You want to be kind of doing things. You want to be playing up the Beanstalk. You want to be playing your Bring to Lights. You want to be able to go get your Niv Mizzets and things like that. And I think if you are unable to do any of that in a timely manner, you're just going to kind of get blown out by whatever other aggro decks are in the format. And again, I think aggro is actually pretty good in this format currently, outside of some other outliers where, you know, they make aggro decks relatively ineffective for the most part. But yeah, like those would be my picks for mid-range decks in this format currently. Now let's go ahead. Now go to the opposite end of the like aggro spectrum, where we're going to look at some control decks that I think could perform very well in the format. Now, this might be a little weird, and I'll explain it and everything. But as far as like control decks for the format, I actually have Waste Not. I classify it as a control deck, and I'll explain why. And I have Blue-White Control right behind it. Look, Waste Not, to me, at least, is a control deck because it kind of plays like this, you know, hand disruption, kind of like let's kind of pick apart your hand sort of thing, and then it is just going to try and play like Shieldred, like later on in the game, or like a Hostile Investigator. I've even seen some versions, like I think playing like Kalidas, things like that. It can be sort of kind of aggressive. You know, you do have creature lands in the deck. You also have, like I said, Shieldreds and whatnot. But I think it kind of falls more for me in that control aspect, because I think in a lot of matchups you are going to assume kind of this like control role where you're going to like Thoughtseize on 1, you're going to play a Waste Not on 2, and then you're going to play something like a Go Blank or whatever, and just kind of control your opponent's hand, try to control the board, run them out of resources, make it very hard for them to try to come back into the game, reduce the impact that like their haymakers have once they're able to play them, if they're able to get to them. And then, you know, you just have like Waste Not take over. Maybe you make some zombies, win the game that way. Slam a Shieldred and make your opponent, you know, basically draw themselves to death, and then also be unable to find an answer for said Shieldred. So I kind of put Waste Not in like this kind of control thing. I don't think that there's like really a go button for Waste Not. It's certainly, I think, slower than Rakdos Vampires. I think as far as mid-range decks, Rakdos Vampires is kind of on that, you know, more aggressive, or has the ability to have a more aggressive slant to it, where I don't think Waste Not, you know, really has like that, you know, it's going to be super aggressive, and, you know, it's going to want to be that way. And I just don't think that's possible. I think it definitely plays more like a control deck, and I think it's a lot better than, you know, what Blue-White Control is doing. That said, you know, Blue-White Control is, you know, it's the control colors. Like, that's exactly what the deck wants to do. It wants to play No More Lies. It wants to play March and the Wandering Emperor and things like that, and just kind of slowly accrue some value by getting to like draw some cards when your opponent doesn't do anything, countering spells that, you know, could potentially be bad for you. And thanks to like Restless Anchorage, you know, the land that makes it like a flyer or whatever, it can play a little bit lighter on some of the other wing conditions, and it can just kind of rely on this land, once it, hits its 11th, 12th, and 13th land drop to be able to activate, attack, make some map tokens, end up growing it, give you a little bit of card selection in a way, make sure you hit your land drops, what have you. Just overall for me, I think the Waste Not, like mono black, like discard decks are a lot better at controlling the game because, again, I think the format kind of leaned towards being a little bit more aggressive. Of course, again, Rakdos Vampires and like Is It Phoenix are at the very top of the meta game, and you have the Amalia and Nykthos kind of rounding it out. And I think the Nykthos decks are very much like resource dependent. I think that if they don't really draw a lot of their their creatures that allow them to draw cards or, get a lot of green devotion in play, then I think as like the Waste Not deck, you can theoretically win that matchup and make life very difficult for your Nykthos opponent. And also just having all the removal and, again, taking away resources from the Amalia combo deck, short of them drawing, their one or two of like Return to the Ranks or finding like a Court of Calling, and they manage to somehow get like one or two creatures and a few lands in play. I think it just does a very good job at being like a control deck kind of for those decks kind of at the top end. So for me, Waste Not gets like the nod as like one of the best control decks to be playing in the format currently, where I don't necessarily hate blue-white control, but every time I feel like I pick up the deck and I play it, I just can't do very well, and then I watch other people play it, and it also just doesn't seem like it does that well. Of course, unless I have to play it in a tournament, then the blue-white control player, I feel like just draws the absolute nuts as far as like what a control player can draw, and of course it just gets like the rep of just being a very boring deck, but not very boring when you're the person playing it, because if you're winning, you win for like 20 minutes and then your opponent finally decides that all their outs have been extinguished and they can no longer win the game, and they've left themselves 5 minutes to try to win 2 games. So that's always fun. But yeah, I definitely have more stock in Waste Not being a very good control deck going forward. And blue-white control, and definitely in certain spots, I think blue-white control can be better than Waste Not. But, overall, I just like what the mono-black discard decks are doing. I like what Waste Not is doing, and it's just kind of like a neat little like value engine, and especially if you can get like multiples going as well. The deck is absolutely nuts. So that's kind of where I'd put my eggs in. Waste Not over like blue-white control, but I think both decks are very fine options to be playing in the format. So we go on, completely off the rails here, where we kind of look at some combo decks of the format. Now, combo, obviously, every deck has some kind of combo. We know that Rakdos Vampires has Sorin plus Vein Ripper as like their combo and whatnot. Slickshot aggro with, something like Monstrous Rage into whatever else is like a combo or whatever, like in the very loose terms. These decks are 2 decks that I think need a decent amount of resources to kind of accomplish their thing. They can do it relatively consistently, and they kind of build out boards by just kind of like chaining cards together and whatnot. So for me, like the number one combo deck in the format, and probably a surprise to nobody, especially if you've been around my channel for a while, is the Amalia combo deck. It's so good. It's just so good. The fact that, this deck is kind of hated out because people hate drawing games or whatever, and I feel like a little bit more now, I think for the fact that like Slickshot aggro is kind of like a thing. Of course, the Amalia player can also force draws as well, but the fact that this deck has the ability to potentially draw a game is definitely a feel bad. But like aside from that, it's amazing. Like the evolution of this deck from the regional championship in Atlanta at the end of 2023 up until the version we see now, like 6-7 months later since that event, is night and day. The fact that Aetherflux Reservoir kind of gives you a way that like, okay, I don't have to win with attacking with Amalia. If I just gain a ton of life and I slam an Aetherflux Reservoir, like you can't simultaneously have, or at least it's very hard, simultaneously have an answer for a 20 plus power Amalia on the board and then also be able to beat an Aetherflux Reservoir, or just beat me like milling a ton of cards, finding a Return to the Ranks, and then bringing back a bunch of little life gain creatures plus a Dina to then just kind of drain you out from there, on top of also reestablishing my combo and kind of forcing, if you only have one removal spell, are you going to let me have another 20 power creature, or are you going to have me drain you out and potentially kill you from there as well? So it just plenty of different ways, tons of consistency. You have Court of Calling, you have the collected companies. You have some very good utility creatures that you can go and get that then come back from Return to the Ranks. You get to play things like Fauna Shaman to ditch creatures. You can even go get something like an Extraction Specialist to then go get the creature back, get some more life gain triggers. It does a lot. And it's a deck that, even like my co-host Randy, was playing Is It Phoenix for a while, decided, hey, I'm going to pick up Amalia, and then made the finals of an RC or of an RCQ, with the Amalia deck. It's just that good. It by far and away the best combo deck. Maybe not the most fun for a lot of people, but to me, it's a deck that I enjoy very much. I think creature combo is absolutely insane. Kind of seeing that with like Nadu and Modern, and then before that, with the Yawgmoth decks kind of hanging around like the top 2, top 3 decks of the metagame for quite a long time. And Amalia definitely deserves her flowers as just being like one of the best combo decks in Pioneer, hands down, point blank. Mono Green is a combo deck in my eyes. Again, for the fact that with like the Trailblazer, things like that, where like 4-power creatures, you're going to get to draw cards, adding to your devotion. It's just kind of like what the deck needed, post Karn, where, you're getting to play an Outcast or whatever. You're going to get to add a mana, and then you get to play, one of your 3 drops that's going to add a ton of devotion. You're going to get to draw a card, and then you're kind of chaining these cards together where it's like, okay, you play another one, you're going to draw a card. Or you're going to play another 4-power thing, you're going to draw another, you're going to draw 2 cards. And you're going to keep going, and you're going to end up building out a huge board, passing the turn back to your opponent, and they're not going to really be able to deal with it because, again, you're just going to have like a ton of devotion to kind of play around with, so that even if it only draws like a few cards and you put like some extra devotion into play, you're still going to be able to kind of continue the combo. You're going to be able to storm the festival. You're going to be able to play more of the Outrider or whatever the heck it's called. Of course, I reference it like a million times, and I don't actually know the name of it. The 4/2 from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set, and getting to play like Cavalier of Thorns and whatnot. Like the deck just has a ton of consistency, and the fact that it's going to be able to find its creatures, it's going to be able to find Nykthos, it's going to be able to generate tons of mana, and thanks to Leyline just giving it a huge burst of green devotion right off the rip, it just means that it's going to be able to do it sooner, and it's going to be able to build out this giant board that it's going to have a very hard time for any other aggro decks to kind of beat through, because their creatures just randomly have like reach. Like, why do they have to have reach? Like, if you're the Phoenix deck and you just kind of like watch this deck go off, you have to find a way to, like, with your team of flying creatures, somehow get around like 6 reachers that a lot of the time, unless you have like Proph's Eidetic Memory or you've had a Ledger Shredder stick around for quite a few turns, that you're going to have a very hard time actually beating their board and everything, and actually beating through their creatures, but you're just going to die on the crackback anyway. So the reason why like Mono Green doesn't really like do it for me, and like why I think Amalia is better, Amalia just has so many options to just win the game on the spot, where, yeah, sure, like they combo and do their thing. And, I think Mono Green, like if Amalia doesn't win the game on the spot, I think Mono Green has a little bit better of a board, because, if you Wrath them, then, short of a Wrath on both ends, like Amalia, you can get past like targeted removal or whatever, and, that's going to kind of end it. But again, you're more than likely dead to the, Aetherflux Reservoir that's on top, or the Return to the Ranks that they found, or the fact that they looked at half their deck. Even if they didn't find it, I would say that they're a very, either they already have it in hand, or they're like setting up, like they're a lot closer than what they were. We're like Mono Green, if you don't have a Wrath, like they're going to more than likely win on the swing back. But Amalia just has so many options where even if I don't win this turn, I'm going to win next turn. Where Mono Green, I think it's not necessarily guaranteed, but definitely pretty close in my opinion. I think you can't go wrong with either of these decks, as I've been saying with a lot of these decks. I think that they offer 2 different kinds of play styles that you can kind of work towards. If you're more into like the more traditional, I would say, creature combo decks, I think Amalia is like a very good choice. I still think it's like one of the best combo decks to be playing in the format currently, and probably one of the best decks to be playing in the format, period. Where Mono Green is definitely more of like the, you could play a pretty aggressive strategy. You could just play 3 mana 4/4s or 3 mana 4/5s into like 5 mana 5/6s, and never like see Nykthos, never generate, ridiculous amounts of mana, casts like Storm the Festival 17 times, and you can still win the game just by playing big creatures, turning them sideways, and forcing your opponent to have to try to answer them individually, and they just don't really go away after you deal with them, especially things like wild or the Old Growth Troll or whatever, where if you kill it, it's just going to come back, your opponent gets the Devotion, and their forest or whatever land they enchant ends up tapping for 2 green, which means that it's just kind of like a 1-land combo with like Nykthos to then just generate tons of mana from there as well. So can't go wrong with either one. Again, I definitely prefer the Amalia decks over something like Mono Green, but Mono Green also has its advantages of just like you're never necessarily going to win the game like the turn that you kind of go off and do the thing, but it's almost guaranteed on the next turn, where Amalia, you have the opportunity to win that turn as well as the next turn as well. So that's our combo. We're going to look at some of the outliers. I kind of classify these next decks as like tempo decks, just because I don't think they necessarily fit into kind of what's going on. I think they definitely work better when you're able to kind of interact a little bit more with your opponent, but then they kind of also have this option of just not really being interactive and kind of disrupting what your opponent's doing while also kind of forwarding your own board state. So the last kind of classification we have is tempo decks. Essentially, they're just kind of doing their own thing. I guess if you want to call Izzet Phoenix like a combo deck, I don't think that would be totally accurate, in the same way that like Waste Not to me is like a control deck over a mid-range deck, which that being said, Izzet Phoenix is probably my number one deck as far as like tempo, and there's not really any other options out there. I mean, you have like Blue-White Spirits, which I think would be like the next closest to like a tempo deck, and playing kind of the same way Izzet Phoenix is. Just what Phoenix is doing is a lot different from what other decks are doing. The fact that against Izzet Phoenix, if you just bring in something like Rest in Peace or some kind of like Graveyard Hate, you have like the Ashioks that are kind of flying around, you have the Go Blanks and stuff that you see in like the sideboard of like black mid-range decks, and even in the case of like Waste Not in the main deck, you can't really beat this deck. If you deal with the graveyard, it has things like Ledger Shredder, it has Prof's Eidetic Memory now, where it can just play this game where it's just going to cast a bunch of cantrips, and it can get rid of, the Treasure Cruises, which definitely makes Prof a lot more explosive, and makes the, the Treasure Cruises, the one-sided Ancestrals, just that much better. And just completely just take over a game, where now your Picklock Pranksters are now, able to be 4/6s and 5/7s. Your Ledger Shredders are just naturally going to get big because you're going to want to play multiple spells, and you're going to semi-punish your opponent for also playing multiple spells by triggering your own Ledger Shredder. And when you get them in multiples of 2s and 3s, I played at a RCQ this past weekend where I was able to get like 2 or 3 of them in play, and I was drawing like 2 to 3 extra cards a turn every turn. It was just absolutely insane. You got your Treasure Cruises faster, you got to your Temporal Masteries and things like that. You were able to copy your Treasure Cruises and things like that. And Profs was absolutely nuts, where I killed my opponent from 18 with an active Profs in play with just a Ledger Shredder and a Dream. So I mean, definitely a case where Izzet Phoenix is just doing something so different from what the other decks are doing. It's kind of able to just deploy a bunch of cantrips. It's able to play things like Ledger Shredder, or even end step like Free the Fae and whatnot, and kind of do these things almost regardless of like what your opponent's doing. And if they're tapping out to play a creature, you have removal to kind of deal with it. If your opponent's not really doing anything, you're able to kind of dig for like Spell Pierces and whatnot, or dig for threats to kind of put things into play. Ledger Shredder comes down, it's not immediately like threatening, but once you kind of get a few triggers from it, you put a few counters on it, or you get like a Profs or whatever, it kind of takes the deck to a whole new level and is a lot easier at playing this kind of tempo strategy. You even some playing something like Brazen Borrower to kind of like bounce your opponent's thing. Definitely something good to do on like their end of turn, where you just like basically time walk them. You bounce like their turn 2 or turn 3 play, and then you have this creature that whenever you find a window to actually get it into play, whether it is that turn where you play your third land, or it's like later in the game when your opponent's just kind of run out of resources, you're both top decking, you just have like this 3-power flyer that can come in and beat your opponent down and try to get you across the finish line. Again, also wears counters from Prof's Eidetic Memory very nicely. It just all kind of like culminates in Izzet Phoenix probably being still, and has been for a while, battling for the one spot with Rakdos Vampires. I think that it's just kind of up to, who's playing what at what time. I think that I garnered a lot of respect for Phoenix. I played it for a little bit, a few years ago, and then kind of fell out of favor, and it's kind of come back. And it's something that I think just naturally is a lot of fun for a lot of players to do, like casting cantrips, playing like sleight of hand, opt, consider, what have you. Getting to like occasionally spell pierce something and playing treasure cruise is just fun things to do if you're the person doing them. And I can see where it is very frustrating being on the other side of it, where now, like with profs and stuff like that, when, it wasn't already bad enough that your opponent was drawing 3 cards or, got to draw a bunch of cards with, like, Ledger Shredder, but now, like, their 2-4 Ledger Shredder or their 3-5 Ledger Shredder is now, like, a 7-8 power flyer, like, beating down, and, short of, like, bouncing it or having something like a Fatal Push, you're going to have a very, very, very hard time actually getting to deal with their threats. On the other side of it, you have, like, blue-white spirits, which, their creatures get to be a little bit more disruptive, but in different ways, where Phoenix, you're just kind of like cantripping, doing your thing, and then like you're finding your removal spells, or you're finding like your spell pierces and things like that, or even like some of your bounce spells in the case of like Brazen Borrower, to kind of like time walk your opponent as much as possible, basically make their turns feel like they don't matter all that often, to where like their first meaningful turn happens on like turn 3 or turn 4, and you've already established like a few Phoenixes and maybe a Ledger Shredder is going actively, where like blue-white spirits, you're able to kind of play at instant speed on your opponent's turn, where they play their removal, you flash in like your spirits to like give your other spirits like hexproof, or your other spirit hexproof, so that it's a little bit harder for them to, they have to have multiple removal spells to end up dealing with those creatures. They also then give their other spirits flash, so then you can play like your lords and stuff and protect them from, their removal spells and things like that. On top of also getting 2-mana counterspells that are, like Lofty Denial and things like that, where you're going to have like a 2-mana counter that's going to force them to pay 4 if you control a flying creature. More than likely you're going to, and essentially having to pay 4 for a spell in most cases, especially in like in the early to mid game, is either going to like completely tap your opponent out, and you're just not going to care about it because like they basically wasted their turn doing this one singular thing, while you're able to play multiple spirits in a turn, or play a counterspell plus a spirit, what have you, and kind of keep the pressure going, while also making life difficult for whatever deck, mid-range combo control, whatever aggro, whatever they're doing, you're going to kind of give them a hard time doing it. I just think Izzet Phoenix does it so much better than Spirits. I think Spirits is like kind of this aggressive deck that can be a little bit tempo-y, is fine, but like Izzet Phoenix is so explosive. Unless you draw like the top half of your deck is literally just like cantrips, it's never like a Ledger Shredder, it's no Phoenixes, it's not even like Free the Phase and things like that, which is a lot of your deck, all things considered. And you're essentially stuck playing this, like, is a deck that is just trying to cantrip, hit land drops, and, play removal spells until it's able to kind of find its thing. Even in some cases, too, like, depending on your opponent's draw, that could just be good enough, even though you've already going to play, like, a lot of your spells where you want to be casting 2 spells. You're already going to, like, have, all the good ones gone, essentially, at that point. You're going to be stuck with, like, treasure cruises with not very many cards in library. But, I think overall, like, Izzet Phoenix, I can't sing its praises enough. It's easily one of the best decks to be playing in the format, period. It's by far the best tempo deck, and I would not be surprised if this deck continues its dominance, because, like I said, even with the Graveyard Hate, it has things on the sideboard to kind of play around the Graveyard Hate. It has a game plan already in the main deck where it doesn't need its Graveyard necessarily to kind of do the thing, even though, like, Game 1 Graveyard Hate is pretty brutal for it when you're kind of leaning a little bit harder on the treasure cruises and things like that, and a little bit more of the Phoenixes as well, because again, that's kind of the power of the deck. But yeah, that's the last like macro archetype. Let's go ahead and try to wrap this thing up. So that's kind of our look at the macro archetypes of Pioneer, some of the decks I would play, the reasons why, things like that. Hopefully you found this video very helpful to either find a different deck that maybe you want to play, just to kind of change up kind of what you're doing. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I don't think you necessarily need to step away from whatever archetype you're playing. Like if you're playing any one of these decks, I think that you can find success in the format for sure, along with some other decks as well. I definitely don't want to downplay the amount of how important it is to just have knowledge and comfortability of the deck that you're playing, rather than just trying to switch to either the best deck in like a certain like macro archetype, or trying to figure out the best deck in the format in general. I don't think that, any of these decks right now are so good that you can just kind of, unless you're playing like the worst deck in Pioneer and you go to play like, is it Phoenix or something like that, then yeah, I think that your win percentage will for sure go up, but I don't think your win percentage will go up any meaningful amount if you're playing like Niv Delight and you're like, okay, I'm going to play like Slick Shot aggro or whatnot, or I'm playing, Blue-White Spirits, I'm going to switch to something like Amalia, whatever. Like, I don't know if necessarily your win percentage will go up so much more drastically that it's worth it to do so, where, again, the amount of knowledge that you're losing and comfortability when you switch decks like that, I just don't think it's worth it. I could be wrong. For a lot of players it is, but for me personally, I like to decide on a deck that I think is good for the metagame and just kind of stick to it, learn it, and, just try to figure out how do I beat the bad matchups rather than, either hoping to dodge them, because, that is a thing you can do, hope to dodge the bad matchups, but learn how to play against them, figure out, ways to kind of get around it, because a lot of the times if you can kind of outsmart your opponent, like if you know what's going on and they don't really know what's going on, you can play into that fact and end up winning games that maybe you shouldn't win in normal positions if like both players end up like making the statistically correct play or whatnot. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you're playing in Pioneer, if you're qualified for the regional championship, what have you. Obviously if you found this very helpful, whatever it is, any questions, comments, concerns, really anything, I'm down to talking to anybody in the comments or whatever. So, feel free to do that. Again, leave a like on the video, subscribe if you have not already subscribed, as is a free, easy way to support me and my content. We're getting really close to 1,000 guys. Like, I am so pumped. Like, it's not even funny. I think I have like this little bit of like a semi-dry, a little less of like a pop, like bombastic, like personality and stuff like that. But, really inside, it's awesome. Like the journey so far has been so cool, and I cannot wait to kind of continue it as we kind of try to do it and move on to some bigger and better things in terms of like what we have going on here. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it for me. I could rant for like another hour if I wanted to in front of this camera, so I gotta go. I'll catch you all later. See you all in the next video, and have a good day.